Right, Deb, ready to go live?
Yeah, ready. I think.
Perfect. Sure?
Yeah.
No,
Go for it.
Hey, good evening. I'm Andy.
And I'm Debs.
Stay tuned.
It's Codes of the Unknown.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Tonight's guest is Andrew Collins, renowned author. He's got a new book out called Origins of the Gods, and we'd like to know where it all started and what the book's about.
Yes.
Okay, well, it starts back in the mid-70s. I'm afraid that I'm older than I appear, and well, I hope so anyway. I decided that I was going to become a UFO investigator. I had an interest, in the subject, and I felt that I wanted to just get closer to the whole phenomena itself. So I started investigating a lot of witnesses of UFOs, most of them, just lights in the sky to start with. But then very gradually I started to speak to people that had close encounters. And I mean, at this time, I believed that all UFOs were alien spacecraft. I thought that the smaller ones were scout craft, the bigger ones were motherships, and the ones that were too small were probably some kind of probe sent out, to look at the human race or something. Yeah. That was it. I was a nuts and bolts man.
Yeah.
But as I went on, I suddenly realised that something wasn't right, because I would speak to various witnesses, and those that had seen genuine objects at close quarters in particular, firstly, also seem to have had other psychic experiences, like they'd seen a ghost, they experienced poltergeist phenomena, astral projection, they could go into an old building, feel presences, perhaps even see glimpses of the past. And I couldn't understand why there might be this relationship. I thought that doesn't make sense. If you're dealing with nuts and bolts spacecraft coming from afar, why should it single out psychic people? I thought, well, maybe these psychic people are all just liars, basically, making it up.
Yeah.
Then the other thing that became apparent is that when a lot of these people were seeing these objects at close quarters, the objects were responding to them. They were either stopping, changing course and coming close to them. They could put out a mental thought and they would respond in some way. And I thought, this also doesn't make any sense, because if you see a Boeing 747 crossing the sky, just by observing it doesn't change the course of its flight.
No.
So, what's going on here? And I I eventually ended up interviewing lots of close encounter witnesses all over the country on behalf of the British UFO Research Association and the UFO Investigation Network. And I'll be honest, eventually I became so disillusioned with the UFO subject, I just left it alone.
Yeah.
Right. But then I read a book which changed everything. And this was Paul Devereaux's Earthlights. And basically what he said was, look, these objects are real. However, they are related to the Earth itself. The Earth has a way of producing these objects of light, not just small balls, but much larger constructs. Yeah. And geology is the key. Everything from fault lines to tectonic plates to certain types of rocks, such as quartz or tourmaline, metal ores such as iron or copper. All of these help to either generate or conduct electricity. And electricity is essentially electrons that have been freed up from atoms flowing here and there. Basically, that's what electricity is, or certainly electricity with a current. Yeah. And so why should any of this be important? Well, what happens is that when all these electrons break the surface and go into the air, they can congeal together to form masses, these objects, which are contained initially of electrons, but they're so excited that they release photons of light. So they suddenly burst into light. And these can exist for, a microsecond, or they can, be around for minutes, perhaps even hours. And the main constituent of these objects is what we call plasma. And plasma is the full state of matter. We have solids, that's the table here. We have, water, which is obviously a liquid. And obviously we have gases, the air around us. I mean, those are the three states of matter. And if you go beyond them, there is a fourth state, and this is plasma. And plasma becomes an incredibly important substance to do with everything to do with the universe. I mean, 99% of the universe is plasma, not material matter. The sun, the fact that we're seeing the sun is because it's creating plasma. There is plasma in lightning, plasma in black holes, white holes, neutron stars. It's even in your smart TV, and you can create it in your microwave if you know how to do it. I mean, just look it up on YouTube. I mean, it's an incredible substance, and and the important thing about it is that it can take on different forms. It can be invisible. It can be manifest. It will appear as objects. It can appear as these electronic fogs. It can appear in all different ways. Plus, it can respond to human consciousness, and it seems to have an element within it that suggests that it is intelligent. It is an intelligent life in its own part. Now, if I can just carry on, I mean, plasma has obviously been known for, probably about 150 years. It was discovered by a guy called William Crookes, a scientist in the mid-19th century, who also did a lot of work with paranormal phenomena, by the way. Yeah. And basically, back in the 50s and the 60s, there was a theoretical physicist by the name of David Bohm, who came across from the States, worked at Bristol University, and he did a lot of work with plasma. And what he concluded was that it was alive, and the plasma itself, was the stuff by which a intelligence was entering inside from a deeper level of existence. He called this deeper level the implicate order. His colleague Basil Hiley called it the pre-space, and it was like a medium existing outside of normal space-time that could interact with our physical reality through the medium of plasma itself. And so he did a lot of work on this, a lot of work on what this medium was and how it related to the world. And he believed that it was important for the evolution of life, basically. That's what he wrote about in various books and papers. So, studying this, I started to realize that plasma is a key element of many UFOs. Not all of them. I mean, we've all seen the wonderful videos of mysterious objects, all the rest of it. But a percentage of UFOs, genuine UFOs, close encounters, involve plasma and the intelligences associated with them. Yeah. And that's one of the areas of this new book. Beyond that is, well, okay, this is all very nice, but how does it relate to aliens? How does it relate to interdimensional, existences? How does it relate to human evolution or human civilization? And that is what this book is about. In other words, what impact all of this has had on human civilization since the beginning.
Right. I'll just put a picture of the book up so everyone can see it.
There we go.
The one. So it's Origins of the Gods. Did you say it's due for release on the 11th of May in America?
Yeah, on the 10th of May in America, you get the physical copy. It will be a little later in the UK, but you can obviously order it now. But if you want to read it as a ebook, you can get it today. Or if you want to read it as an audible book, you can get it today in any part of the world. You know, through Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any good online bookstore.
Yeah.
Cool. By the way, I must point out, it's not just written by me. It's written by my friend and colleague, Greg Little, as well. We've both done 2 halves of the book, basically.
Oh, right, okay.
I mean, his side is more to do with Native American traditions, which is quite extraordinary, because what he's discovered is that there is a pattern amongst many different tribes relating to their cosmology and the rituals that they do, and that they surround the idea that there is cosmic intelligences and that it is essential to keep the connection with those cosmic intelligences, and that many Native American tribes do the complex rituals, that last days, perhaps even weeks, to try and ensure that this relationship between us and these cosmic intelligences, which it often have the appearance of what we call greys or whatever, are there. And this is something that clearly goes back many thousands of years, and that we can learn a lot from Native American peoples about this relationship that we have with these intelligences, which we think are probably more likely to be transdimensional in nature as opposed to simply extraterrestrial.
Yeah. I'm assuming that your co-author's part of the book is the one that deals with the Skinwalkers and everything. Then.
No, well, that's my part.
Is that you?
I mean, the thing is that plasma UFOs, as we can call them, are more easily seen at certain locations around the world. Now, this is something that's been known to ufologists, for decades. People call them window areas, or places of where the veil is thin between this world and the next. But it's very often the geology of those locations that define what's special about them and why they are more likely to produce UFOs and other strange encounters or occurrences. And the modern term we use today is portals. And the most obvious portal in the world right now, because it's got its own television show, is called Skinwalker Ranch. And I was there in 2019. I spent a few days there, was able to be taken around the whole of the ranch. I got to know the people who were involved in everything there, but also workers, just people that were coming in on a daily basis, that were working on the ranch, who had no real interest in UFOs. I mean, they knew that things were going on, and many of them had seen objects at close quarters, and that was the most fascinating thing. Some of them multiple, and they were just happy to talk about them. They had no absolute interest in the subject, and they described what they could see. And what was interesting is that most of the experiences all surrounded the exact same part of the ranch. Right. And that is what's known as the Northern Mesa. Which is just a huge cliff that runs east-west on the northern side of the ranch. Now, the Native American peoples of the region, who are the Ute and the Navajo, refer to this as the path of the Skinwalker. That's what they call the Northern Mesa. Not the rest of it, that particular area, because for 150 years or whatever, they have seen it associated with manifestations of what they call a skinwalker. And a skinwalker, for those that don't know, is the supernatural form that a Native American witch, and I use that term lightly, I mean, we'd probably more obviously refer to them as a shaman, can take when they take part in rituals to go off, you know, and do their thing. And often that thing is involved with curses. You know, they will take this supernatural form to do these curses. Now, the most likely form that a Navajo witch will take is actually a wolf. And in fact, the same word for wolf and witch is the same word. I can't remember what it is.
Oh, right, okay.
I mean, it's the same word.
Yeah.
But as I say, don't get an impression of Western-style European witches here. We're not talking about, you know, cackling old ladies. We're talking about shamans, you know, of any age or any sex that would take part in these rituals. And why would they think that there was a curse to the land? Well, the answer is a lot of activities, wars that went on in the mid-19th century in the Uinta Basin, where Skinwalker Ranch is located. And there were wars between the Utes and the Navajo, where the Utes actually defeated the Navajo, and they actually not only took them prisoner, but they sold them as slaves.
Right.
And this is historically recorded. It's not, you know, controversial. And I get the feeling there's a lot of guilt involved with that, they believe that because of it, the Navajo thereafter put a curse not only on the Ute, but also the area of Skinwalker Ranch, which in the past was a sacred land. It was a land that no tribe would specifically live on. They would go there to do their rituals. There's evidence of Native American activity there. There's a stone circle. There's a there's glyphs on the, you know, on the rocks and stuff like this. And clearly they believed that this place was sacred until it all started going wrong, until they predominantly started seeing skinwalkers there. And of course, these things are still seen today, whether they be oversized wolves, and by the way, wolves are not indigenous to that region anymore, or these dogman, what in archaeology are referred to as lycons, but which is the correct term for a dog-headed biped, basically. And they're still being seen today. I mean, I've given references for these in the book, and of course, they're not unique to Skinwalker Ranch, but you know, you have to then start saying, well, you know, what is going on in Skinwalker Ranch? Well, I chatted at length with the people there, and they believe that you're dealing with one single intelligence that manifests in different ways. Now, we refer to these intelligences, which are essentially invisible, but they will manifest in different ways, and they are in many ways omnipotent in the sense that they know what you're doing, can predict what you're doing, just like a ghost in a poltergeist house, for instance. You can imagine that on a much wider scale within a whole landscape. We refer to them as egregores because, I mean, an egregore is essentially a being that is created through human consciousness interaction. I mean, clearly using some kind of energy that pre-exists and a mechanism to absorb that energy. But what happens is that it absorbs the human consciousness connection with a particular environment across hundreds, if not thousands of years, perhaps going back to the Paleolithic age. And it will base its forms, the way it will appear and manifest, on what's been fed into it across that period, particularly any time frames or cultures that have been particularly important to that particular location. And you know, I think you have an egregore at Skinwalker Ranch, and that's exactly what the guys there believe, that there is an overriding intelligence to the phenomena that seems to know what you're doing and can catch you out, can appear when you haven't got your cameras loaded, can appear where the cameras, the only place on the ranch where the cameras are not looking, it'll suddenly manifest. I mean, it's all actions, like a hive mind of something much bigger. And this term hive mind is something which my colleague Paul Sinclair talked about in connection with Bempton in Yorkshire. You know, he sees the phenomena there, which I presume most of your viewers will also be aware of, that this is another portal location in the UK, which is often considered to be like the British Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, it is.
And Paul believes that all of the whole phenomena is part of an overriding intelligence, and that he sees it almost in terms of a hive mind of activity. And I'd agree entirely with that. Yeah, and if you want to think of this intelligence as a microcosm, think what happens when you go into a haunted house. You know, there will be a personality there, maybe more than one, but generally, you know, an overriding personality that will control and manipulate what goes on, whether it be to do with the people that live in that location, or obviously visitors or ghost hunters or whatever. And the sense that a lot of people come away from is that there is a single intelligence creating all of the phenomena that takes place.
Yeah. Can I just ask, did you have any encounters while you was over at Skinwalker? Did you experience anything? No
encounters. I mean, two strange things though. Firstly, it has an incredibly strange vibe about it, and I've only felt this vibe at one other place in the world. I mean, Bempton's got its own vibe, but that's slightly different. But I described it whilst I was there, and I scribbled this down. Is it was almost like on the edge of paradise. It was beautiful and bright, but you could imagine something manifesting out of some parallel dimension at any moment. Yeah. And what's so strange is that I took a photograph there of what's known as Homestead 2, which is where a lot of the phenomena is associated with. Yeah. And right over it is this weird creature. That's all I can say. I mean, the pictures in the book. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anything of it because I don't honestly know what it is. Yeah. But it's been studied by a large number of people, including a birdie, you know, what do you call them? The bird watcher people in Utah.
Ornithologists.
Yeah, that's it. And they don't know what the hell it is. It looks like a very bright yellow and blue and black creature, like a bird. It's got something hanging from it. Almost looks like a stalk of wheat. Right. And it's very, very peculiar. It's in focus, which means it's not like a what do you call it, like an insect, very close.
So somewhat close.
A lot of and I mean, you know, some people said, maybe it's a drone or something like that. Well, there was a drone being used, not at that exact moment, but you know, by a team that were there, and it's clearly not a drone. I mean, you just got to look at it. There's no way this is a regular drone. But it's an enigma. I haven't got an answer. It's published in the book. So, you know, you can have a look at it and see what you think yourself. Yeah. But, you know, when I saw it, I just thought this almost typifies the feeling of the place, that anything could happen at any moment. Yeah. That's what you feel. And I think that's crucial as well for phenomena appearing, because if you went and stood in the car park of your local Tesco's or something, obviously Walmart for those in America, you know, you wouldn't feel as if suddenly something paranormal was about to happen. No. I wouldn't have thought, or very rarely. But if you go to Skinwalker Ranch or Bempton or any other similar location that's considered to be a portal, then there is that sense of connection immediately, and that makes it much more likely that human consciousness interaction will result in a genuine occurrence. Yeah. I genuinely believe that is something that we need to factor in. I mean, these locations are weird in themselves, and the phenomena may well occur, but you put humans into the frame and it doubles the chance of activity taking place.
Yeah. So when you took the photo, I'm guessing you just taking random photos, or
I was just I mean, to be honest, I knew that this was a special opportunity. Yeah, so I took video footage, I took photos all the time. I recorded virtually every moment I was there.
Yeah, right.
Sound recorders, because I wanted to examine everything.
Yeah, you wanted to,
and you know, and it was, and all of it was shown to my colleague Rodney Hale, who's been in the business of examining photos, sound recordings, video recordings since the late 1970s, and you know, everything that I record passes through him. He examines things like sound waves, waveforms, and stuff like this. to find out if anything unusual is taking place. And we did record a burst of very low frequency sound waves there, which we cannot explain. And this is when we were up on the northern mesa, and there is no explanation, none. And this is something that we found in connection with a few portal locations, like Rendlesham Forest, for instance, in Suffolk. Obviously, the site of the famous Rendlesham incident in 1980, UFOs. I mean, you know, we recorded a very low frequency burst of activity there, which cannot be explained by, you know, passing vehicles or aircraft or anything like that, because, you know, each one of those gives certain signatures. And, you know, if it's occurring when you're miles away from the nearest car, then something very strange is going on.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Did you actually stop at Skinwalker, or did you keep going backwards and forwards?
I went there a couple of days separately, so I didn't stay there. But I did spend an entire evening there with all of the guys, and that was one of my best moments of my life, I think. Well, not our best, but certainly a very you know, just to wind down with a few bottles of beer and just hear the stories, be shown around, and just sit out in the veranda and look out the night sky. It's brilliant.
Yeah. No, I was just going to ask if you felt any perceivable difference between night and day, because I recently went. Not really. No, in fact, in all honesty, it felt more vibey during the day than it did at night. Right.
I'm sure if I stayed there long enough, things, you know, might be seen, you know, objects or whatever. But for me, it was more vibey during the day.
Yeah. It's just that I went to Bempton recently, and there's a perceivable difference between the two during the day.
Oh no, I mean, you know, I've been out there on my own at Bempton, and it scared the shit out of me. Sorry, excuse me.
You're all right.
Bad language. And I mean, and I've taken a few people there that have been very scared being up there on the cliffs, and for no logical reason, really. No. You know, other than the fact that you can encounter a dog man at any time. I mean, other than that, you know,
it was all right.
Yeah, that's always in the back of your mind when you're wandering about in the night.
It is, and there's been a number of cases, and obviously I've you know, spent a lot of time with Paul Sinclair when up there and on the phone, and we've obviously done various, you know, shared interviews together. I mean, I've listened to recordings that he's made of people telling stories of their encounters with dogmen, and these people are seriously concerned about what they've seen. I mean, there is no way in the world that they're lying, none at all. No. And therefore, you have to say to yourself, where do these things come from? And I think the answer, in my opinion, is that you are dealing with the creation of very localized portals, which probably do relate to plasma. And remember, plasma doesn't have to be visible. No. It can be present without you knowing it, particularly within weird fogs and things like that, which seem to be very much connected with things like the Bermuda Triangle and certain abduction cases. And I think that what happens is that under certain circumstances, we overlap with parallel worlds and parallel dimensions that allow an overspill or a spill out from these parallel worlds into our physical existence for a temporary period of time. And I mean, and we're not talking about the appearance of a doorway of light in front of you like you get on a, you know, science fiction or fantasy film. It's not like that. It's about, if you can imagine two circles, each of them represent parallel universes gradually coming together and just slightly overlapping. And when that overlap takes place, that's when these creatures, I think, or intelligences can connect with us. But what happens is that they shift apart again very quickly. And at such times, when the other parallel universe shifts away, it's like it wipes clean the presence of that particular creature or whatever. I mean, it may have left behind footprints, it may have left behind you know, some other evidence of its activity, but it's gone. It doesn't exist within our realm anymore. And this was something that I first realized in 1984. Well, probably even earlier, but certainly I wrote about it for the first time in 1984 when I was investigating cases of Black Panthers appearing in my home county of Essex.
Yeah.
And there were about 3 or 4, main sightings, and 3 of them all came together, within a matter of a day, 48 hours. And then there was one final one about a week later. And that, again, is a strange pattern. You get a burst of them, then it disappears for a bit. Then there's one further encounter, and then it disappears completely. And I'd noticed this pattern before, but this time there were a number of weird synchronicities associated with these sightings, which were the sort of things that John Keel talks about in his books to do with strange creatures out of time and space, like the Mothman and stuff like this. And I started to realize there was a possibility that these things were coming into our realm and then going back out to wherever it was that they were coming from.
Yeah.
And this is what I wrote. This was in a journal I used to do called EarthQuest News. And that was my first statement to do with this. And I stick with that right the way through to today.
Yeah.
And I think that this is an answer to Bigfoot and various other types of cryptid, that they can be quite physically real whilst they're here, but they just vanish back from where they come. Now, I mean, I'm not saying they all are necessarily to be tarred with the same brush, because in our business, we talk in terms of 2 different types of cryptids, those with shadows and those without.
Right.
And those without are clearly manifestations which have no real part in our reality, but that can still be seen and experienced, whereas those that do have a shadow are very clearly manifesting physically in our world and may be more obviously connected with our reality in some way. They may be disappearing again, but they're much more associated with our space-time. So, that's the criteria, if you like, whether they have shadows or whether they haven't got shadows.
Yeah. Can I just quickly ask a question, just going back to the portal thing? Do you think that is anything controlling when these portals can or cannot be opened or closed?
I think that human consciousness interaction is the key. Right. And I mean, this can be anything from, synchronized ceremonies, rituals, to black magic, sacrifices, stuff like this, which somehow seem to shake open these portals and phenomena occurs. I mean, the Black Panthers I was just telling you about all appeared after a goat was found sacrificed very close by.
Right.
The strange thing is that nobody made the link. I mean, you had this goat that was sacrificed, suggesting black magic. Then you had these Black Panther sightings in the same general area, and nobody had really made the link. I did, because I saw that there could be a link. And if you look at places like Bempton, or even Skinwalker Ranch, you're dealing with a lot of human activity, human consciousness interaction on a ritualistic level. I mean, at Bempton, for instance, you've got these underground, what do you call them? The RAF.
Bases, bunkers,
bunkers, that were used during the 70s and 80s by people into black magic and whatever. And you've got all these quite lurid murals on the walls down there, and it tells you a lot was going on. These murals are not just done by kids. I mean, they were professionally done. That in itself is going to wobble the relationship between this realm and any coexistent ones through mental consciousness. I mean, you can't do stuff like that and just walk away from it and expect that everything is finished and over. That will have repercussions for decades, perhaps centuries, perhaps even thousands of years. I mean, at Bempton, for instance, the oldest Mesolithic ritual centre in the country is located at Star Car, just a few miles away from Bempton. And that location at Star Car is where the various Dogman sightings have been seen. And the Flixton werewolf. Flixton werewolf. Flixton is right next to Star Car.
Yeah.
And at Flixton, we know that shamanism was taking place, not only to do with deer, I mean, people were wearing deer antlers and deer, but they also found a wolf skull there, which was clearly being used and preserved for some function. And I would predict that it was being used for wolf shamanism.
Yeah.
That was very interesting.
You know, so what I'm saying is that the activities that may have been going on at Star Car and presumably other similar sites locally as much as 11,000 years ago are still having reverberations today, and may well account for some of the Dogman sightings. In other words, not the fact that they occur, but the manner they occur, the fact that you're seeing Dogmen.
I want to know, I'd like you to tell us, should I say, about the Black Alchemist, what that story's all about.
Blimey, we're going back in history here. Yeah, I mean, the other hat that I wear, other than trying to solve ancient mysteries and writing about science and history, is what we call psychic questing. And this is something which sort of came about in the late 1970s with the idea of working with psychics, working with their information and see where it would go, essentially. And the end product, the goal, if you like, would be the outcome of that. And it could be the finding of an artifact, it could be the solving of a landscape or historical mystery, or perhaps even just a personal enlightenment in some way. And as early as 1979, we started finding artifacts, and those who have read books like The Green Stone by Graham Phillips or my book, The Seventh Sword, will know all about that. But in the mid-1980s, I started working with a very talented Essex psychic by the name of Bernard. And, you know, we were using his brain to try and look into mysteries to do with medieval times, ancient Egypt, and a few things like that. But he started picking up on this this golden staff with a snake curled around it, which he felt was ancient Egyptian and had been brought to Britain at the time of the Crusades in medieval times, and that it was still out there somewhere, and that he was starting to get information suggesting where one of the fragments, because he felt that it had been broken up eventually, would be found. And this was a place called Wilmington, which is in East Sussex, and you got the hill figure there.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, we went down there, and we ended up at this little church called Lullington, and we felt we were going to find clues there. I mean, I'm oversimplifying this. And we get into this little churchyard. It's beautiful sunny afternoon, and we sit down to try and attune. And he just starts getting a really bad feeling about this place. And he said, I feel that black magic has gone on here. That was the exact word that he used, black magic. And I said, oh, right. I'm thinking, oh, well, so what? I mean, I'm more interested in this ancient Egyptian artifact than people doing silly things here in the past. But it was clearly clouding his mind and stopping him connect with anything else. And eventually he was able to retrieve from this piece of stone sticking out the ground, which was the only remnant of a previous church there. Right by the side, he found this long shale spearhead made of really made of stone with these magical symbols on, and it made him physically sick. He was sick straight away, and so we realised we're not going to be able to go on. So we left there, went back to Wilmington Priory, which was nearby, and he said, I can't go on. He said, this is, you know, it's over. We're going to have to go back to Essex. And so we went back to Essex, and a few weeks later we met up, and I brought up this artifact. By now I'd doused it in holy water and all sorts of things. And you know, he consented eventually to psychometrize it, you know, just to see who might have left it there and why.
Yeah.
And he started seeing this guy who clearly was the person who had left it there at the church, and saw him do a ritual, you know, which he was able to describe, and felt very strongly that he was into alchemy and that he was doing this as part of some kind of landscape alchemical transmutation.
Yeah.
But that it was going wrong and something wasn't right here. And so, you know, as I said, he could see this guy, and somehow he made a link with him mentally. I mean, we call it today entanglement, but he made a link with this person. And what started happening after this time is that Bernard started picking up that this guy was on the move again, doing stuff at other sites.
Yeah.
And at first we would go at the sites and not find anything, but just feel that something had been going on there. But very gradually, these sites were getting closer and closer to where we lived in Essex.
Right.
And what became clear, particularly after we actually started finding artifacts similar to the one that had been discovered in Sussex, is that this guy wanted to know who'd taken away his artifact and was now after us.
Right.
And what follows is a series of cat and mouse like confrontations between us and this guy who we started referring to as the Black Alchemist. Yeah. And obviously that's what's detailed in the book. But the climax of the book, when I say climax, I mean it's not the end, but is all of this coincides with the hurricane of 1987. Obviously the lead up, 85, 86, 87, when obviously the whole of southern England was devastated. And during that time, we believe he and his group were doing rituals. And we found evidence of this immediately after that. And it gets very heavy, very, very heavy. But if you're into horror stories and you want true horror stories, read The Black Alchemist. You can buy it to this day from Amazon. I mean, the cover's pretty gruesome. But, you know, if you're into this sort of stuff, go get it.
It's on my list.
Yeah.
I have a list.
I was going to say, all the links that you've sent me are going to be in the description of this anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of the books that you've done, they're all in there.
Well, just come on to andrewcollins.com and on the opening page, there is a whole series of links. Click books and you'll see all the stuff I've done, including The Black Alchemist.
Yeah. I think I've got your website link as well.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll put that on there. So, yeah, it's all good. Excellent.
Right, your question, Andy.
So when you refer, just going back to shadows and shadowless. Yeah. These different entities. Some with shadows and some without.
Yeah.
This might seem a bit of a stupid question, but with shadow men or shadow people, is there a connection between them and the shadowless entity?
Probably, but I think the important thing with shadow people, shadow men, whatever you want to call them, is that we are seeing just a reflection of something that's clearly there that we cannot properly see. And that strongly suggests to me that you're dealing with a transdimensional being or creature that, because it's has an extra dimension of space, maybe more, we can't see it properly. I mean, the thing is, we are three-dimensional creatures. And there was a book written many years ago called Flatland, which was trying to look at the different dimensions, and it looked at a world that was flat, clearly Flatland, which was two-dimensional, and it was trying to account or explain what would happen if a third-dimensional object or being entered into a flatland. And I show this in the book. There's illustrations to show what I mean. But all flatlander, a two-dimensional being would see is something flat, just gradually. If, let's say a ball, it would just be like a point that would open up as a circle. That got larger and larger as the ball went through the flat land. And then as it passed through, it would gradually close up again. and until nothing was there. And of course, the Flatlander, all they'd see is a gradually expanding circle that gets to a point and then contracts again into nothing.
Yeah.
They wouldn't understand what's going on. They would never see the ball. They can't possibly see the ball.
No.
Now, if you then take it on to the next level, we are three-dimensional creatures. We can never, ever see a four-dimensional creature or being. I mean, it's impossible. We can see something. It may be fuzzy. It may take a form that we find acceptable because it's somehow reflecting what is in our minds. You know, so we may see a fairy, an alien, Jesus Christ, or whatever it is that your personal belief and an acceptance level can take on board. But you will not see the true nature of that being, that intelligence. It's impossible for us to do that. So that when we see these shadow beings, and what I have seen is that is some footage of from security cameras of people in the house have had weird stuff happening, and they've actually seen a shadow being pushing objects off of a a cupboard or a sideboard or whatever, and you can see the shadow almost manifesting but then just disappearing again. And I'm not saying necessarily that that particular video that's in my mind is true, but it gives a good example of what we're dealing with here, something that we cannot properly make out, cannot properly see, but can interact with our three-dimensional world, because it operates with an extra dimension of space, and we can't almost see it happening. It's there, it's clearly present, and it's clearly interacting with our physical world. But because we haven't got four-dimensional glasses, we cannot make out exactly what's going on. That to me is what a shadow person or a shadow people are all about. We are glimpsing something that has a much more solid form, but we can't clearly make it out.
No, I totally agree with that. I've said that before, haven't I? On other stuff. It's like it's like each dimension you see less and less.
They're out of sync with our 3D reality.
Like I said, with each dimension you see less and less of what it actually is.
Absolutely. But I mean, remember, we're not dealing with a creature that's outside of our three dimensions. No. We're dealing with a creature that has an extra dimension itself, but still has and still operates with the three dimensions of space that we deal with. It's not out there solely.
No. It's here, but we can't see that the next dimension. I mean, I'm not saying they're here all the time. Maybe they are at certain places. And these transdimensional intelligences have their own home, which we can come on to. Right.
Yeah, that was one of your questions, Andy.
Sorry, I've got a list of questions. I'm just trying to find them. So when they come into our dimension, are you saying like they go back to their home? Where is their home? What is their home?
Right. Well, I think for this we need to sort of return back to UFOs, and obviously the general belief amongst ufologists, people that are interested in the subject, is that when you see a UFO, it's coming here from another planet or another star system or another galaxy. And of course, under some circumstances, that could be correct. I mean, Carl Sagan, for instance, as far back as the early 60s, wrote a paper that he said, he concluded that the Earth would have been visited on many occasions by extraterrestrials. And he even suggested looking in Sumerian texts for possible evidence of these visitations. So if he says it, and he was one of the greatest arguably the greatest cosmologist that's been around for a long while. I think it's true. I think that we have been visited on many occasions. I mean, and continue to be visited by extraterrestrials in some form. However, I think that there is another explanation as well, and that many plasma UFOs are conscious living beings, or not the plasma itself, but what's coming into the plasma and manipulating it
Yeah.
Whilst it's manifested into our world, are beings that are coming from the outside, as we like to refer to it. And that outside has a name within string theory, or more particularly in the area of string theory known as M theory. And M theory is basically a catch-all for about 5 different string theories that were all brought together and were found to work if you looked at 11 dimensions. Previous to that time, they'd only thought about 10. But with M theory, everything worked, everything slotted together. It was like all these pieces of a jigsaw all slotted together, provided you looked in terms of 11 dimensions. Now, 3 of those dimensions of space are the ones that we live in here.
Yeah.
There's a dimension of time.
Sorry, do you want me to put that?
In our world is linear and moving forward, but we'll come back to that one.
Yeah.
In this area outside of our time, there is another dimension of space, making 4 of space, plus the 1 of time, making 5 in all. But the time dimension would not work the same as it does with us.
Right.
It would be able to access the past, the future, and possibly all of it at the same time once you enter into a higher dimensional state.
Yeah.
Okay. But that still leaves 6 dimensions. And these 6 dimensions are considered to be, and this is the term they use, this is what the term, compactified. And what this means is that if you can imagine them all scrunched up together, and you know that they're out there and that they only unfurl under certain circumstances.
Like
now, they don't know what these extra 6 dimensions represent, or you know how they interact, or what they mean. I think they probably have something to do with consciousness myself. Right. And I tell you for why. Because 11 dimensions is something that comes up again and again. Not just, you know, to do with string theory, but also to do with the brain, the human brain. There is an institution called the Blue Brain Project in Switzerland. And a few years ago, I mean, basically what they're trying to do is take out consciousness and put it into a computer. That's their, you know, they're working towards ultimate transhumanism. That's what they're doing. But what they found, and this, you know, you look this up online, is that they've worked out that the brain operates on as many as 11 dimensions of geometry. Now, this is incredibly important because that suggests that we are hardwired to be able to deal with 11 dimensions. In other words, this realm of the outside, we can connect with it. I mean, it's almost like, obviously, with our phones, you know, I mean, our phones are, you know, 5G, even though we've only got 4G at the moment. They're 5G ready. And it's like our brains are 11-dimensional ready. You know, so when we finally you know, regain this understanding of all the dimensions, then we're already hardwired for it. So what is this outside? What is this existence outside? Well, in string theory, it's called the bulk.
Yeah.
And if the way that you need to imagine it is that if you can think of a cosmic motherboard that exists outside of physical reality, so it has the capacity to create, and it creates universes within it that expand out like bubbles or a balloon.
Yeah.
And what these universes, these physical universes, which overlay, so in other words, the bulk is also within it, but they expand out, and these are like our own that have 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. And the time obviously is based upon the creation of this universe and its gradual expansion outwards. But there's not just one of these bubble universes. There are probably many of them, and they call them brains or brain worlds. And these brain worlds can either exist separately, or it's suggested they may touch, or they may be able to overlap. And that's an important thing, because this could start suggesting how we overlap with these parallel worlds and the creatures, the cryptids, and whatever start interacting with ours. And I mean, these brain worlds don't have to be big. I mean, some of them can be the size of our universe. Some of them can be tiny. They, you know, they open up and close, and they are doing this all the time. And they could overlay our own physical reality if necessary. So I believe that these transdimensional beings, which we call N beings, by the way, which is short for N-dimensional beings, and the reason why we call them is because we are unsure whether 11 dimensions or 5 dimensions is the amount of dimensions that they operate within. It could be more. I mean, it could be 32, it could be 150. We don't know. So we just use the N, which stands for number within the quantum field, and we call them M beings, basically. And we think that the home of the M beings, if you like, where they come from when they're not around here, is the bulk, basically.
Right.
Term which a lot of people online, when I mention it, I say, I don't like that term. I say, we'll just call it the outside then. It's outside our physical reality, but it exists. It's projected the 11 dimensions. How does our physical reality be created? Well, it's thought that the bulk creates what are referred to as white holes, and those white holes act as a means, almost like wormholes, connecting the bulk to what is about to be created. And it's almost like a balloon being blown up, initially with plasma. White holes create plasma, but that plasma converts to physical matter very quickly. And the other important thing about plasma, which I've not mentioned so far, is that various theoretical physicists have now concluded that it has an extra dimension of space. And if that's correct, then this becomes the perfect step down or step up mechanism between the bulk and our physical reality. And in other words, the intelligences that we see to do with UFOs are coming from the bulk and using plasma to manifest in physical reality.
Right. Interesting. Do you want me to put that picture up? The coloured one? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That's what's known as a Kalubi-Yau manifold. And that is how the string theory or M theory physicists perceive the 6 dimensions compactified or curled up together. I mean, look this up online. You know, there are some great pictures. But what I find interesting about this is that it resembles, and various of the other images of these Kalubi-Yau manifolds closely resemble the stone balls that were used by the Neolithic peoples in places like the Orkney Islands and Scotland about 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, and also very similar to the stone balls that were used by the peoples at a place called the Kezem Cave, which we'll probably come on to, in Israel as much as 400,000 years ago. Multifaceted stone balls. And one wonders whether, when people are going into deep shamanic states, altered states of consciousness, that they could glimpse higher dimensional realms and bring back what they see, and that they see these Kalubi-Yau manifolds, these compacted dimensions, and are able to convey that into physical form, and that thereafter these physical objects then become points of contact to try and go back to the outside or the bulk, whatever you want to call it.
I'll put the stone ball one up now then.
Yeah. Okay, right. This is one of the multifaceted stone balls. These are handheld, that were used as points of contact with the other world, or the land of the ancestors, by these people at this place called the Kezem Cave as much as 400,000 years ago. And they become important. And the reason for this is that we all have heard of the idea of ancient astronauts. My friend and colleague Eric von Daniken, who has written the foreword to Origins of the Gods. So, you know, he's endorsing the way that things are moving forward. Now, his idea was that places like Stonehenge or the pyramids or the Nazca Lines could have been influenced by extraterrestrials, you know, visitations. Yeah. But he was looking at it in terms of flesh and blood aliens coming down here and perhaps giving us a bit of technology and innovation. But I think that there's a good chance that in addition to the possibility of flesh and blood aliens coming down here, we are dealing with interdimensional or transdimensional beings actually affecting human consciousness, generally through what we call today UFO encounters, or straightforward shamanic experiences and altered states of consciousness. And the importance about the Kesem cave, and I think you've got a picture there you might want to put up, the one of the shaman working inside the cave, lots of red in it, have a look for it, is that I believe that these interactions have been going on for at least 400,000 years, and arguably right the way back to the creation of the very first hand axe 1.75 million years ago in the African Rift Valley in what is today Kenya. And we went suddenly from picking up a rock like this and just smashing it down so that it was a bit pointed and using it in some manner without any kind of cohesion or pattern or anything. We suddenly almost went overnight into creating the most beautiful stone tools possible. And you think, well, hold on, what was going on then? Why did these people suddenly change from what they call pebble tools to creating what's known as the Acheulean hand axe, which then became the standard, almost like the Swiss army knife of its day, right the way through until about 200,000 years ago. And the answer is very, very simple, because at the same time that we created that hand axe, we also invented fire for the first time, or certainly we started using fire in cave environments for the first time. Why is this important? Well, firstly, it's a great innovation to be able to create fire, and this may have allowed people to talk and gather around a campfire and whatever, you know, discuss innovation and idea. Yeah, of course. And that's what the scholar, the academic would tell you. But it's more than that, because once you start creating fires, you start putting things on the fire. You put logs, you put plants on them, and some of those plants are eventually going to be psychoactive. And that is going to start affecting human consciousness, and you're going to start drifting into altered states, and those altered states are going to bring communication with otherworldly realms and the intelligences within those realms. And there you go. This is an image of what we call the first shaman 400,000 years ago in the Kesem cave, with this, you know, his psychoactive plants, which are going to pull on the fire, and the stone balls that we were talking to you about being used on the floor there as part of a ritual. And obviously people in the background probably chanting at the same time, building up the energy. This was done by my good friend, the artist Russell Hussain. So thank you, Russell, for that. And I mean, okay, where are we going with all this? Well, the fact is that the Kesem cave people 400,000 years ago suddenly started to become the smartest people on the planet. And this is beyond the fact that they invented shamanism. They invented shamanism. A swan wing bone has been found there, that's been modified and kept in a special place that was clearly being used as part of the paraphernalia of a shaman. And this is not just me saying that. This is the archaeologists working at the site. And in addition to that, they were using these stone balls as points of focus. Again, not my mad idea, but coming out of the archaeologists at the site. And they were additionally creating incredible stone tool technologies. They were creating the first freezers, as they're referred to, which is basically they were able to freeze dry food, you know, and store it for months in a way which nobody else achieved before. Read about it in the book. It's not the sort of freezers we're dealing with. They created the first canned food that, you know, they would break legs off of deer, immediately wrap them in certain types of stuff, and they could preserve them for months. So, you know, and then they could just break them off and have the nutritious marrow within them. And they were the first people to use fire in a sustained pit across a massively long period of time, and loads of other different things like this. They were very, very clever people. In fact, as I said, they were becoming the smartest people on the planet at this time. Now, also, the important thing is that these people weren't Neanderthals. They weren't Denisovans, which is another subject matter that features in the book. They were our ancestors. The teeth that have been found in the Kezem cave are quite clearly similar to our teeth.
Yeah.
And so, in other words, we're talking about our earliest ancestors. And they were doing this at the same time that they were going into altered states and communicating with other realms and other intelligences. And I believe that what was going on here is that they are beginning to communicate with trans-dimensional intelligences who they've encountered locally. And you say, well, hold on, how do you know that all this was going on 400,000 years ago? Well, I can tell you, because on the horizon from the Kezem cave, which, by the way, is located a few miles outside of modern-day Tel Aviv, is a mountain called Mount Gerizim. And the importance about Mount Gerizim is that in the book of Genesis, it is the original dwelling place of the God of the Israelites. When Abraham first arrived in the promised land, he came to the foot of Mount Gerizim. Yahweh appears to him and says, you know, this is where I want you to build my altar. You know, this is going to be your promised land, basically. Yeah. It's also where, what's his name? The guy that sees the angels climbing up and down the ladder between earth and heaven. His name's gone completely out of my head. It's all in the book. He was the grandson of Abraham. I'll come back to me. It wasn't Elijah. And it was also the place where the Israelites, after their 40 years in the wilderness, the first place that they went to when they arrived in the Holy Land was Mount Gerizim, and they did this huge ritual, this big ceremony called the blessings, the ceremony of the blessings and the curses, right at the base of Mount Gerizim in the city there, which was called Shechem. And they had with them by now the Ark of the Covenant, and you know, I show pictures of that with this incredible light appearing, out of it. Now, okay, so again, we asked, why is Mount Gerizim important? Well, because the way that God would appear on Mount Gerizim is in his form as the Shekinah. And the Shekinah means his radiance or light.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, and that's what Shekinah means. It means the presence of God in the form of a light. And that light is most obviously associated with the Ark of the Covenant, and also the manner that Moses encounters God on Mount Sinai, again, as a blazing light. So we're talking about light forms. We're talking about plasma. Yeah. So, you know, was God, you know, some kind of being manifesting as light? And what we know about Mount Gerizim is that lights have been seen there historically, they're recorded, and in modern times. I went to the Kezem cave, spent quite a lot of time with the archaeologists there, going over everything about these people. But I then went from there into the Palestinian territories and visited Mount Gerizim, and climbed it in a car, by the way, not by hand. And you know, that there is a community of people that live there known as the Samaritans. The Samaritans are they claim to be the true descendants of the Israelites, and they have revered Mount Gerizim since the beginning, basically, and they say this remains the dwelling place of God, and it's not Jerusalem. Jerusalem comes into the biblical story much, much later in time. Again, I go into all of that in the book, but the significance is I went up to one of the highest ranking priests of the Samaritans, and we started engaging him about, you know, these lights. I said, you know, do you know about these lights that were seen on Mount? He said, oh yes, yeah, we know. Yeah, I said, well, what are they? You know, what do you see them as today? And the word that he used, and bear in mind he was speaking in Arabic, and there was a translator with me. He just said malak, and I knew exactly what that meant. It means angels.
All right.
So these lights, what we call UFOs, manifesting on that mountain today, are seen as the angels or messengers of God. You know, that's it. The strange lights appear. They're the messengers of God. They're the angels. And I find this, you know, quite extraordinary, because if somebody from the Western world saw those same lights, they say, "Oh, look, a spaceship." Yeah. So, you know, this is what I say. And these lights, these objects, have been appearing for many thousands of years. And I think that they were present when Abraham and the other early patriarchs and prophets arrived in the area, and they saw that as evidence of God's presence on that mountain. Those were the visible signs of his manifestation there, and those lights are still seen to this day. So can we dare to suggest that the Kezem people were seeing those same lights as much as 400,000 years ago, and that it would have attracted them to that mountain? Well, what we do know is that those Kezem people went all the way to that mountain to take a certain type of flint from its slopes to make their stone tools. So did they believe that flint was specially endowed with some magical property because of the lights, because of what was going on there? I think the answer is yes, and that all of this thereafter featured in their rituals, which would take place inside the Kezem cave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, we'll have a quick break.
Seven, six, five, four, three, two, one, zero.
And we're back.
Hello.
We are.
Yeah.
We are.
It didn't seem to be as long as I thought it was going to be. I thought 4 minutes might be too long. So our normal break was 2 minutes. But
Yeah,
perfect timing.
definitely. Right. I want to know about what you know about human hybrids. What's that all about?
Hybrids. Well, I mean, when you say human hybrids, to me that means a mixture between one of the cousins of humanity, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans, and obviously our own ancestors, which are Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
And this is something which I've written about in various books. Denisovan Origins being the main one, which was also done with Greg Little, came out a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
Is that in the past we shared the world with other types of human. Yeah. Some of them were very tall, which were the Denisovans. Some of them were quite small, like the Neanderthals. And there were possibly even others that were even smaller than that, like the hobbits of the island of Flores in Indonesia, who were probably only about 3 to 3.5 feet tall.
Wow.
And there were others as well. Homo erectus existed down to about 200,000 years ago, possibly even later than that. And so at a time, let's say around 300,000 years ago, I mean, there would have been 4 or 5 different people existing on this earth who would have made it almost like a sort of Lord of the Rings style world, with the dwarves and the elves and the hobbits and whoever else. I mean, it would have been a very, very similar situation. And of course, what happens is that eventually these people get together and they produce hybrids. Yeah. Now, obviously, the first generation hybrids will have the mother of one, let's say a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. And that child will learn the skills of both of them, both not only from a material point of view, but also mental skills as well. In other words, they'll start thinking differently. And it would seem as if our own Homo sapien ancestors encountered the Denisovans in areas like Tibet and Siberia, and seemingly Mongolia, China, that sort of area, as much as 60 to 70,000 years ago. And what happened was that we would eventually, interbreed with them. And I think that this in itself became an acceleration of human consciousness, human innovation, human technology that would create what's known as the Upper Paleolithic age, that would eventually end up with the creation of the incredible stone structures that we see at places like Gobekli Tepe in southeast Turkey, which forms the foundation point of our civilization. Obviously from there you get Sumerian cultures, Egyptian cultures, Babylonian, Indus Valley, China, etc., etc. Yeah. And all of these, I think, are the result of hybridization across a very long period of time, certainly as much as 50 to 60,000 years ago. And of course, you know, we are the mongrels at the end of it, to be honest, because we have a certain amount of Denisovan DNA, or certainly some modern populations do, particularly in Eastern Asia, Southeastern Asia, Ireland, Southeast Asia, and in places like India, Pakistan, etc.
Yeah.
Whereas us in the West generally have Neanderthal DNA in us, anything up to 2 to 3%, which doesn't sound a lot, but it is actually quite important because it's helped mold and create us in the way that we are today. And the thing we can say about both the Neanderthals and the Denisovans is that they were incredibly sophisticated. I mean, the Denisovans, for instance, about 40, 50,000 years ago, were creating the most beautiful bracelets made of green stone, that if you look at them, you know, you think that these were created, you know, in modern times, or certainly within the past few thousand years. They also created the first bone needles, quite clearly, to sew and create clothes. There's also some evidence they may even have ridden horses. They had an incredibly complex stone tool technology, which they passed on to us and became a regular part of our toolkit all the way down to the Bronze Age period. Beyond that, what else did they have? Oh yeah, there's evidence that they had a knowledge of the cycles of the sun and the moon, and used this in the creation of certain artifacts with notations that have certain, you know, key numbers that keep recurring, and that they may even have been aware of eclipse cycles. And if that's the case, then they seemingly recognize these as in some way important to their own destiny and their own future. And I say that because some of the genes that's been found within the Denisovan genome, which was first extracted in 2010, relates to autism. And as we know, certain people on the autistic scale can have incredible savant, qualities and abilities, you know, to do with music, to do with art, to do with calendar counting, and, you know, being able to predict forward, for not just a few years, but hundreds of years, knowing exactly what day, you know, May the 1st, 2051 is going to fall on, and they'll tell you instantaneously. And I think that the Denisovans had a similar mindset, and that this was something that they passed on to us. The Neanderthals didn't have that. That's the interesting thing. Those same genes have not been found in the genome of the Neanderthals, even though they were very sophisticated in their own right. So you have to say to yourself, well, you know, this autistic traits, I mean, although it's something today that's seen as a medical condition, we strive to, you know, to be able to relate to it in some ways, even today. And yet I think that certain peoples in the past, particularly the Denisovans, had this mindset all the time, and that was just a part of their life.
Yeah. So where did the Nephilim fit in? Why did they die out, do you think?
Okay, well, the Nephilim is a term that we find in chapter 6 of the book of Genesis, and it said something to the effect of, you know, in those days, you know, there were it says giants in the earth. Well, the original word, although you don't see this in many Bibles, is Nephilim. There were Nephilim in the earth at the time when the sons of men came upon the daughters of man. The sons of God came upon the daughters of men, and, you know, blah blah blah. I mean, you'll see this in books, say chapter 6 of the book of Genesis. But the story is expanded greatly in the apocryphal book of Enoch, and another book that coexisted with it called the Book of the Giants. This is all about the Nephilim and their supposed fathers, the Watchers. And these were beings of quite extraordinary size and girth, who lived in a community which was akin to something like a kibbutz on the top of a mountain. And it was said that there was some kind of rebellion amongst these watchers, who, by the way, were, I mean, essentially angels. They were, you know, they were angels, but of a human nature.
Right.
And when this rebellion took place, 200 of their number, it said, descended down onto the plains, clearly coming down from this mountain, and they mixed with, you know, the daughters of men, i.e. the mortal women.
Yeah.
And they became pregnant and gave birth to children, hybrid children, who were the Nephilim. So that's what the Nephilim were. They were the hybrid offspring of the Watchers, human angels and mortal women.
Yeah.
And it said that the Nephilim ran amok, they drank blood, did bad things, and that those angels that remained loyal to heaven, and when we say heaven, we're not talking about up there, we're talking about a place on the top of a mountain.
Yeah.
That was also known as paradise or Eden.
Yes.
And that the Nephilim were rounded up and killed. And those watchers that had rebelled, the rebel watchers, were incarcerated, it said. You know, taken back and incarcerated. Now, all of this is very human-like activity. This doesn't sound like the actions of incorporeal beings coming down from heaven. But and so I wrote about this for the first time in a book called From the Ashes of Angels in 1996. And what I said was that the Watchers and the Nephilim, along with the so-called Anunnaki, the builder gods of Sumerian and Babylonian tradition, are a memory of some kind of shamanic elite that kick-started civilization in southeast Turkey and the Near East in general, but particularly in southeast Turkey, at the end of the last Ice Age, so probably around 11,000 years ago. And I mean, at the time, you know, this was brand new ideas, really. And what I didn't realize is that as I was writing that book, in southeast Turkey itself, the first spades were going in the ground at this site called Gobekli Tepe, where they would uncover this incredibly complex series of stone structures, which have these T-shaped stones in a ring. I mean, several of them have been discovered. And on these stones are these beautiful carvings of animals and very anthropomorphic appearance as well. And a sophisticated society existed there, tiered society that created this incredible structure. And this was being uncovered at the same time that I was writing my book. And this then becomes what Graham Hancock, one of my colleagues and friends, says is the smoking gun of the lost civilization. And what he means by that is that our own civilization has arisen from not simply these people at Gobekli Tepe, but the fact that they themselves were quite clearly inheriting the legacy of a much earlier culture or civilization that must have existed at the time of the Ice Age. And that brought that knowledge forward at places like Gobekli Tepe. And this is essentially, again, what I say in From the Ashes of Angels. So, you know, that was back then. And since that time, I've written several books on this culture, what they call the pre-pottery Neolithic culture that constructed these stone monuments in that area as much as 11 to 11,500 years ago. And just recently, a new structure has been uncovered by archaeologists called a place called Karahan Tepe. And this is even more sophisticated than Gobekli Tepe. And they were cutting into the rocks these huge thrones and buttresses and all sorts of stuff. I mean, incredible stuff, which I'm going to be writing about very soon. And going out there, obviously, to see it.
Excellent.
So basically, in answer to your question, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki are the builders of places like Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe.
Right. I think we've had Tim Brennan on, and Tim was on about that as well. The T-shaped stones that have been found.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
It is. Have you got another question, Deb, or do you want me to go?
No, you go. I've done my questions now.
Right. So I'm going to move off topic slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that all right? Just
We'll see.
yeah, soon find out, won't we?
Yeah.
No, I just got a few. So what are your thoughts on Hollow Earth?
On what? Hollow Earth?
Hollow Earth.
I haven't really got any thoughts on it at all. I mean, I don't believe in it.
Right.
It was something I read about in the 70s in books by people like Brinsley, Lipper, Trench. I think he did actually a whole book on the Hollow Earth, and it fascinated me. But I mean, you might as well say you believe in the flat Earth, you know, to be honest. I mean, I don't want to disrespect people out there. If you believe that, fine. But I personally haven't got any views on it.
Right. Okay. To keep going, Deb.
Yeah. It's your questions now, love.
Yeah. So you've answered a lot of them, so quite difficult. All right. Do you think that we live in some type of simulation?
I mean, not in a Matrix style, no. But I think the Matrix, which obviously sort of brought this whole idea to sort of popular consciousness, is not entirely wrong. And I'll tell you for why. Because the whole concept of the brain worlds within the bulk existing, you know, as part of M theory, suggests that these brain worlds, that we could exist within a, you know, almost like a shell. With you know, that our reality is actually almost like a shell, or like a very thin brain that exists within this bulk, and that, you know, we could be a reflection of a higher dimensional state that coexists around us, that almost keeps us in the dark as far as what's going on outside of our realm. Now, I mean, quite clearly, you know, our world exists. I mean, you know, I mean, there's no question about any of this, but in itself, it's not the be all or end all of everything. And I think that the fact that we can see leaks or wobbles in our reality tells us everything from apples, you know, objects falling out of thin air, to, you know, to the idea of transdimensional beings that being able to enter our realm, cryptids, you know, UFOs in general, really, that we really are, you know, restricted in our knowledge of the greater universe. And that in many ways that it's keeping us in the dark. So no, I don't think we're a part of a matrix, but we're a part of something much bigger that we are not fully aware of.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. Makes more sense.
Yeah, it does. So do you believe that alien hybrids exist then, that actually walk? I mean, what are your theories on actual aliens, such as the Greys? And
I mean, aliens in general, if you see them in terms of flesh and blood extraterrestrials, as I said, you know, Carl Sagan in the 60s wrote a paper suggesting that we would have been you know, visited by extraterrestrials on many occasions. So I have no problem with the idea of physical beings. And I mean, as probably some of your viewers will know, obviously I appear on Ancient Aliens TV show, and very often, you know, I'm investigating some culture in some part of the world to do with stories of star beings and things like that. And you will be surprised at the amount of evidence that there is of beings coming down and interacting with us, and sometimes, you know, interbreeding with us. But then on top of that, going back to where they come from. Now, of course, it could always be argued that this is a metaphor for spirits coming from, you know, some kind of otherworldly realm, you know, manifesting in some manner and then going back. But it does seem quite specific, and sometimes they talk about what we call spaceships as well. And the place where this is most prevalent is in North America, amongst accounts. I mean, these accounts that were written long before the modern flying saucer era. I think I probably quoted some of these in my book, and Greg is certainly quoting some of them in Origins of the Gods. And also places like Indonesia, the South Seas, Polynesia, that area, that's where it's most rich, where you've got stories of these flying boats, you know, coming down, the beings that are in them getting out, helping to build structures like Nan Madol, for instance, in Micronesia. I mean, there's a story about, you know, them being helped, that the stones were helped by beings that came down in this spaceship. I mean, it's there. I mean, this is not a modern creation. So you have to start saying to yourself, you know, what really was going on in the past? Were we really helped by what von Daniken would refer to as ancient astronauts? It has to remain a strong possibility. And this is in addition to everything that I'm talking about. And as far as hybrids are concerned, well, as I said, there are accounts from the South Seas, for instance, that talk about these beings coming down and mating with humankind.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then some of these royal dynasties that would have continued on afterwards are in some way hybrids of that interaction. But the problem is knowing who these sky beings were. I mean, unfortunately, there are no hard and fast answers. No. And I don't think that if you looked into these people's DNA, that's going to particularly help you either. I would strongly suspect that it's just going to be a normal, you know, Homo sapien genome with a little bit of extra DNA from Denisovans and Neanderthals, I should think. So it's a difficult one, but I would not rule out the possibility of aliens and alien hybrids.
Right.
I mean, and the other thing about alien hybrids is, you know, if we talk in terms of things like walk-ins, which would be integrally related to that, is that what is a walking? It's basically somebody's mind being taken over by another consciousness. Right. And this brings us into a subject we've not talked about so far, and that's quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement is the idea that when two particles are created, they retain a permanent, instantaneous link with each other. And that no matter how far away they get from each other, that link will be there. And if you measure one, the other one will have the equal and opposite spin. Like I say, spin these things. Yeah. And we're talking about subatomic particles like electrons, photons of light. And where is this important? Well, it was once believed that that quantum entanglement only worked on a microcosmic level, on a subatomic quantum level. But it's now known that it works also in the microcosmic world. And experiments have been done with diamonds, with tiny drums, which are, you know, smaller than the size of a human hair, which has shown that interactions of entanglement work in the physical world as well. Right. Now, the importance about that is that that's all the microcosm, that's small, but the big is that it's also now believed that black holes, white holes, wormholes could be the product of quantum entanglement. In other words, that each mouth of a wormhole, which remember was first proposed as early as 1935 by Albert Einstein, that each of the mouths have entangled systems of particles with their equal and opposites being in the other mouth. And that if that's the case, then there is a possibility not only of information and energy transfer from one to the other, but also the possibility that if you were able to scramble, you know, the particles in one mouth, they could come out at the other end. And of course, this is the whole idea of wormholes or black holes, etc. Yeah. And so, in other words, you know, quantum entanglement could be the core, at the heart, the very center, not only of the quantum world, but also the physical reality in which we live. So, going back to walk-ins, telepathy, I think, is a product of entanglement. A load of entangled systems in my head, within my brain, within my neurons, electrons going around. The corresponding particles could be in your head. And if that's the case, they would be doing the same dance as what they're doing in my head, and that's transfer of information, and that therefore gives us a mechanism, a hypothesis that we can use to try and understand what we call not just telepathy, but mild mind over matter. In other words, that I could think about something and you would be thinking about the same thing, and that could possibly be manipulated by an intelligent being to make you do things. Now, hopefully that's not a bad thing. You know, in other words, it's not going to make you go out and do something bad, but it might make you inspired, innovative in a certain way. And quite clearly, you might think that those thoughts are yourself, but they may be coming from elsewhere. And that information could be coming in from extraterrestrial sources or transdimensional intelligences. So this could be behind the inspiration of civilization itself. You know, why did we build the Great Pyramid? Why did we build Stonehenge? You know, is it possible that we are being helped by other intelligences, otherworldly intelligences, whether extraterrestrial or transdimensional, and that they are guiding us to do certain things, make certain things, just like in the film Contact, for instance, which, you know, many of your viewers will have seen, which was written, by the way, by Carl Sagan. I mean, one of the most incredible minds that, you know, ever walked this earth. And in the novel, and obviously in the blockbuster film that followed, you know, we receive information from an extraterrestrial source on how to create a device that will allow us to communicate with the intelligences at the source of these communications. Well, although that was seen as a mechanistic thing that came via, excuse me, you know, sounds that were being recorded through a radar dish, there's no reason why it could not also happen directly through into human consciousness. In other words, we may be receiving information to do with mathematical patterns, designs, anything all the time, and we just don't realize that they're there. We just have to externalize them. You know, they arrive as what we might call downloads of information, but it's up to us to transmit and translate that information to the physical world. And if we go back to the Kezem people 400,000 years ago in Israel, I think this is exactly what was going on there. They were being guided by these transdimensional intelligences to invent things. You know, all right, little thing to start with, but it's building civilization. And I think that there's a slow drip process of feeding humanity information that has led to what we have today. And it's eventually going to lead to the invention of quantum computers. Quantum computers are going to be run using quantum entanglement, you know, the whole qubits process, which goes beyond what the bits process that creates the standard computing systems. And I think that once we create those quantum computers, we will almost have a direct line of communication with intelligences, both extraterrestrial and transdimensional. Because why would they not be able to affect them? Why would we not be able to attune them? Because these computers are going to be, you know, 1 million times more advanced than those that we're working today. So we're going to find ways to fine-tune them for these communications, and then that information will come through that will allow us to build even better points of communication with these intelligences.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, you want to go, Deb?
No, I've run out of my questions.
All right.
Just because they come up.
This is more like personal one for you. What is the most fascinating encounter, either one that you've had yourself or one that you've taken a report of?
Sorry, most fascinating what?
The most fascinating encounter or experience, either one of your own or one from you've taken a report.
Well, from my own point of view, I mean, you know, I've seen one ghost, one UFO. I've actually projected a couple of times. I mean, stuff like that, but not being funny. I mean, it's not that particularly inciting. I mean, you know, so many people. But I think one of the stories that has fascinated me ever since the 70s, when I was doing UFO investigations, is the story of a whole family that were driving in a car between one location and another on a short journey of 20 minutes, and they come out of an urban area into country lanes, and they see a UFO, like an oval blue light cross in front of them.
Yeah,
they get excited. There's 3 children in the back of the car. One of them's awake, the other 2 are asleep. And just after they see this UFO, they round the bend. The car headlights fail. This is in 1974, by the way, so this is before Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Car headlights fail. The engine fails. The radio smokes, and they have to pull it out. That's what you used to do with radios back in them days. And they couldn't hear the tires of the vehicle going over the ground, almost suggesting some kind of gravity anomaly. And at which point they encounter this luminous bank of green mist completely covering the road in front of them.
Right.
They go into this, everything stops. They feel nauseous. They don't know what's happening. And then the next thing they know, they're 3/4 of a mile further along the road. And when they get home, I mean, and that would have been a matter of 5-10 minutes after this incident, they find that 3 hours are missing from their life.
Right.
Now, at first, they don't do anything. They don't say anything. But eventually, they start getting some weird dreams about, you know, operating tables and these gnome-like beings over them and whatever. And they finally, in 1977, they reach out via a newspaper and a UFO group to me, and I investigate the case. And I mean, the thing is that not only did I investigate it and write it, and it was written up in a 2-part, you know, article in Flying Saucer Review, which was the main magazine back then. But in addition to this, I spent a lot of time around the house of these people, and I'd go around on a Friday night with my colleague Barry King, who I was working with at the time, and we'd stay on sleeping bags, you know, on a sofa or whatever. And a number of strange things happened during that time. I mean, one of them is that the family, the lady of the house, 3 kids were upstairs. I was on a sofa near the door. John and Barry King were on the floor sleeping in sleeping bags because we'd been working quite late. So they decided not, John decided not to go upstairs to disturb his family. And it was getting light outside, and I suddenly woke up to the sound of the door right behind me just opening. And I look, and there's a very tall, silhouetted figure standing in the door. And I'm looking at that thinking, that's nobody in the house that I know. I mean, the lady of the house was very small, so it was definitely not her. And, you know, I looked, and John and Barry are still in the room. They're in there sleeping in these sleeping bags. I'm thinking, who the hell is that? And at which point there was this pungent smell. I mean, it's often described as rotten eggs in the business. I mean, whether it is rotten eggs, I don't know. I don't think I've ever smelt rotten eggs, to be honest. But it was that real strong, sulphury smell, and it just completely pervaded, you know, my nose, everything. And I just went out like that. And then I woke up a few hours later. By now it's 10, 11 o'clock. And, you know, of course, you think, what the hell happened a few hours ago? And there is no explanation. You know, it was a being in the house. I mean, you know, I mean, and that was just one of many things that were going on in that house, which is obviously the reason why we wanted to try and be there and record anything that was going on. I mean, poltergeist happened. Oh, that's a good one. On another night, I was sleeping alone in that same room, and beyond that room, so away from the upstairs and the stairs going down into the lounge, was the kitchen. And I was just lying there, couldn't really sleep. and suddenly I heard all the pots and pans banging of their own accord, just banging on the wall, as if somebody was just rattling them. And I mean, I was supposed to be a UFO paranormal researcher, so the first thing I do is hide under the covers, because this was terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah.
But here's the weird thing: at that exact moment when I sent out that thought, this sensation came through my feet, up through my body to my head, of this total peace and calm, which I have no explanation for. And at which point I asked why. I won't say I astrally projected, but I suddenly mentally saw myself above the Golden Gate Bridge at San Francisco, which I had no interest in. I've never been there before. Yeah. And it was almost like I was standing on the top of that, watching the cars, and I could see it, that I was in America, because, obviously the cars were driving on the opposite side of the road. And I mean, and then I just fell asleep again. So what the hell was going on there? I mean,
that's weird.
I know. Yeah, I mean, and the strange thing is a few years back, I actually went to San Francisco, and I insisted that I went to the top of the Golden Gate Bridge, not the top of it, but overlooking it, and tried to almost relive that experience. Almost in the sense that maybe it was myself in the future sending back this visual image to myself to calm myself in the past. Now, I know it sounds mad, but once you start thinking about things like quantum entanglement and the fact that it could operate outside of normal space-time, you start to think differently about experiences. And I recreated that, and I visualized myself actually going to myself in 1978, I think the date was, and projecting that image into my head, so that it was creating what they call in the sort of scientific world like a Klein loop, a loop of activity that would perpetuate and be fulfilled when I finally actually did go to San Francisco for the first time.
Right.
How weird is that though? I mean, you can't account for that, can you? It's, like you say, you had no interest in it. You'd never been before.
No. No interest in San Francisco at that time. But as I said, I had the opportunity to go. I mean, I've been there a couple of times since, and on both occasions I've done these, ritual meditations on the cliffs overlooking it.
Yeah.
I find it a very fascinating place now.
Yeah.
Well, when you said you felt like you was overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
Did you feel any air or any smells or anything?
Not really, no. I mean, as I said, I'm not going to say it was an astral projection, but some part of me was there.
Yeah.
And why I should see that, there was no reason at all to see that, particularly after just hearing all pots and pans banging about of their own accord. Very clear poltergeist activity, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, something. I have no idea. I'm more confused than I was when I asked.
Well, it happened. I mean, the trouble is that, people can listen to these stories and they can either believe them or they don't. And, it's a personal experience. It's not evidence of anything. It might help people develop their own theories and ideas.
Yeah.
But that's all it is a personal experience, really.
Well, that's the thing. If we don't talk about things that we've encountered and all that, then we're never going to know what other people have gone through, if they've experienced anything similar or exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because by listening to you, somebody could say, "Do you know that happened to me once?"
Yeah, could trigger something.
Right.
A lot of trigger memories.
I mean, personal experiences are extraordinary to listen to, and they will help us. They help us understand, I think, but they are not evidence of anything, really.
No,
it's just what you've gone through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, I think that brings us to the perfect ending. To be honest.
Okay.
So, really enjoyed that, Andrew.
I'm gonna
let me just push the stuff then, if I can.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I mean, Origins of the Gods is available right now at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and whatever. if you want to read a complete breakdown of the book, go on to andrewcollins.com, and on the opening news page there is a link that says breakdown of the book. Just click that, and you know there's a quite a lengthy piece there that with photographs telling you all about it. A few things coming up. I'm at Megalithomania in Glastonbury, 7th to 8th of May, which is talking about Tepe and the origins of civilization. And then in June, on the 24th to 26th, I shall be at what's known as the Chariots of the Gods Expo event at Blackpool, which is going to be a big event. It's got Eric von Daniken, Giorgio from Ancient Aliens, and a whole host of other people. And I should be talking about the whole origins of the gods story there, basically.
Excellent.
Brilliant.
So and say andrewcollins.com if you want to come on. And there is a link there to email if you want to contact me.
Yeah.
Super.
Oh, and of course, social media. Please find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I use them all.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I'm going to put all the links in the description anyway, but for those who don't read them, that's where else are going to be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, massive thank you for coming on.
No, my pleasure.
Thank you, Deb, for
pleasure.
assisting and helping me. And that's it. So until next time, we'll see you then.
See you later.
Everyone. See you later.
Night. Bye.